So this PowerPoint presentation is going to be on the flipped classroom and how to use it within the AP World History curriculum. You probably have heard about the flipped classroom a whole lot. Maybe you've even practiced this a little bit. I hope that this presentation is going to give you a little bit more information on the flipped classroom. For some of you guys who haven't used it, it may be new for you, but I think this is an awesome tool for helping you to get through the major things you got to get through in the curriculum while still being able to really build and develop the students' skills within the classroom. So what do we mean by the flipped classroom? Well, in order to understand this, we have to first look at a traditional classroom, and this is the sort of like language that's used by teachers who do flipped classrooms. A traditional classroom, which I'm sure most of us have practiced at some point or another, starts off with some kind of warm-up that you have the students do, usually while you're taking roll, and after that warm-up, you give a classroom lecture, or you do maybe some discussion back and forth with the students in order to introduce new concepts, and you might want to even introduce some kind of controversial idea, but usually at this point you're just introducing some of the basic information so that the students can then use that to build up to some major concept that you're going through. After this, you take some of the student questions, and then you'll get into a classroom application or practice. Of course, what's tough about this, of course, is the timing issue. At this point, if you're on the traditional sort of like 55-minute time period, at this point you may really be rushing for time or just finishing up. And so because of that, you're then going to switch over to having them do some homework for reinforcement. In the flipped classroom, the idea is to flip this entire model. So what you're going to do now is that instead of having homework be based upon an application of what you've taught, homework becomes the introduction to the new material itself. That means that when the students enter into the classroom, your warm-up now is actually going to be about 2-3 steps down from what you would do in the traditional classroom. Your warm-up is actually the critical question or the high thinking skills kind of a question. At this point now, you can actually walk around the room and have the students develop what they learned about the night before in some type of project-based learning. At that point, you actually have more time to actually take the material and synthesize it now into new types of information you want the students to get. So the idea of the flipped classroom really is this idea of taking the traditional classroom and flipping it by having the homework do what you would typically do at the beginning of the class inside of your lecture. Now, there are some benefits that I find from flipping the classroom when I use it, and most people who use flipping will talk about these kinds of benefits. First of all, the students are going to get introduced to new basic material at home, and that really allows you to free up some time within the classroom. And so that means that class can really begin right from the start with a critical or controversial question. You don't have to wait to do that in the middle or near the end of class where you really don't have the time to get into things. And it means that you as the teacher can now jump into the critical thinking and skill-based issues that you want to do and facilitate discussions off of that. You don't have to worry about introducing basic material because that's something that the students got the night before. Now, I can imagine what a lot of you guys are thinking right now, and for good reason. And for some of you who practice flipping, you probably have run into challenges. You know, like anything else, I'm not going to try and tell you that flipping the classroom is the end goal for everything. And definitely we can't say that flipping the classroom has no problems whatsoever. It definitely does. It has some challenges. For one thing, most teachers talk about, very understandable, how do you hold students accountable for doing the work at home? If you assign them to do this kind of work at home, you know, how are you going to make sure that they actually do it and they don't just walk into the classroom without having done any work? And now you're really going back and you're teaching the basic concepts anyways. And at that point, flipping the classroom is meaningless. So how do we hold students accountable to make sure this is going to work? Another issue that comes up is how do you keep the students engaged with the material at home? You know, even if a student sits down to do this kind of homework at home, we all kind of know a lot of times they're just rushing through it just to get the points and get done with stuff, and they want to be able to move on. They've got 5 other classes, so how do you really keep them engaged to make sure that they're going to do the kind of work you want them to do? And then the last major problem is, do students really have the resources to do the flipping at home? And that really is a major problem. As you're going to find out, flipping is usually based upon using some type of computer or digital technology to either have the students watch somebody else's work or watch your work. And, you know, if they don't have a computer at home, you know, what are you going to do about that? So those are all really valid disadvantages and challenges that we have to face. I'd like to offer a few possible answers. Before I do, I want to make something really clear. I am not a big believer that any methodology in a classroom is the silver bullet. I think, being a teacher, I've taught now for about 15 years. When I started off, I remember going to a lot of those professional development types of activities where somebody would just be awesome. They'd be charismatic. They'd present this great idea, but the way they presented it was their idea was the end goal of all ideas, and you better use that one or you're just not going to be successful as a teacher. We all know that it doesn't work that way. Everybody's got a different methodology for teaching. We all have different personalities. This is just another tool in your toolbox. If this works for you, great. It's very possible this will work for you in some situations, but not in others. So you should feel free to operationalize and really use and implement this in the ways that work best for you. So here are some of the possible answers that I have to those challenges that hopefully will help you out and allow you to flip the classroom. First of all, when you're flipping the classroom, you want students to watch some type of historical video. Keep the video to about 10 to 15 minutes. You really don't want to go beyond that. And there are a few reasons why. For one thing, 10 to 15 minute video will keep students engaged. It can bring up some major issues without them getting bored and without them being diverted into something else. This also allows them to have more time to do the other homework from the other classes they need to do. Also, you want to use resources that are engaging, informative, and somewhat entertaining. I'm not a big believer that history has to be entertaining. History is supposed to be something that's engaging, appealing, and really makes students think. But we do have to be conscious of the fact we're dealing with teenagers, and to some extent, teenagers need a certain level of entertainment to really kind of get them hooked into the things that we want them to be hooked into. And at that point, then we can really bring up that critical thinking. So I think there's some resources out there to do that, and I'm going to bring them up in a minute. But you want to use something that really is engaging for them and entertaining to them so it keeps them going for that 10 to 15 minutes. Also, the major problem I know a lot of you face out there is a lack of resources, and I totally get this, and I'm not going to say that I have the best answer for this because I don't think there's an absolute answer for this, but I want to give some possible suggestions of what you could do. For one thing, in a lot of schools now, obviously there is a computer lab, and so you could offer that as an option for the students to go to, whether it's before school, after school, or at lunch. Another possibility you could look at is to suggest to the students to go to a public library and use that. I know these are very difficult, obviously, with students who have parents who are working or they've got stuff after school. This is not always a very good possibility, but imagine if you did a flipping of the classroom once every couple weeks. It might be possible for students at that point who don't have the resources to go there. The other possibility I would suggest is that if you ask most students, they're either going to have a computer at home as some type of smartphone or some way to access the internet. You're probably going to have, in most cases, not all, in most cases you might have a handful or less than a handful of kids who don't have this available to them. So I would say work with the majority of kids and make those kids your leaders. Have them do the assignment at home, have them bring that in, and then for the few kids who don't have the digital technology, have the kids teach them and make them sort of dually responsible for two different assignments. And have some of the kids be leaders within the classroom. Those are possible answers. I know it doesn't always solve this perfectly, but hopefully that helps out a little bit with some of those challenges. Here are some possible resources that you could use when you're doing this. I love using, I'm going to show you in a minute, John Green's Crash Course. He's got two of these for World History. There's Crash Course for World History 1 and Crash Course for World History 2. The first one is 42 different videos. They stretch all the way from the beginning of world history all the way up until globalization. They're about 10 to 12 minutes long at the most, and they're excellent to use. John Green is funny, he's entertaining, but he's also extremely informative. John Green also has a second series of world history, and it's based upon thematic units. And so they have the big things, everything from disease to war to different societies. It's a great way to sort of wrap up units. Khan Academy is another place where a young guy named Khan went out and formed this academy that's online and allows students to be able to learn. And he explains that the reason why it works so well, the story behind it of why it's worked so well, is that he was sitting down at one point with his cousin, and he was teaching his cousin, and he started teaching his cousin online, and his cousin told him, it would be great if you could just keep teaching online because I actually find you more interesting online than I do in person. And the explanation was they got to go back and forth and they got to pause the video and learn more. iTunes University has great ways to connect up with all the major universities out there. You can take a selection from a particular video and sort of cut it down and use that. Coursera is a free place to get courses for yourself as well as for students. And last up, I really suggest the Big History Project, which has a few videos on it for its different units that talk about these big picture and big scale type of issues that deal with the evolution of human life and its interactions with other things going on. So at this point, I want to show you a little bit of one of these sources, and that is John Green. In this particular case, John Green, this is his thematic unit that comes from Crash Course World History 2. And this particular one is about disease.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course World History, and today we're going to talk about a subject that makes me profoundly uncomfortable. Disease. This is a tough subject for me personally because I'm a bit of a hypochondriac, but to be fair, my fears are kind of rational. I am afraid that my existence will be ended by a soulless microscopic organism, and to be fair, they have killed a lot of people. You're not paranoid if germs are actually out to get you, and as we'll see today, they are. Fortunately, we live in the 21st century when communicable disease does not play such a massive role in human history, unless, of course, you count bird flu or SARS or HIV/AIDS or antibiotic-resistant bacteria. All right, Stan, let's just go to the intro. Okay, so longtime viewers of Crash Course will remember the 16th century Great Dying in the Americas, not only as an example of historians' total inability to name things, but also as perhaps the most important and wide-ranging effect that disease has had on human cultures in millennia. But traditionally, the study of history hasn't focused much on diseases, partly because they're mysterious and terrifying, and partly because they don't fit in very well with our ideas about history being the result of human agency. We like to imagine that things happen because we did good things, or because we did bad things, or at least because we did some kind of thing. But in fact, history often happens because lots of people got smallpox. There's also the fact that diseases were often seen to be the result of divine will, or else divine wrath. Plus, because people didn't know that much about disease, they didn't write about it very often, and when they did write about it, they didn't always write about it particularly well. So when you read primary sources, often they're like, why'd they die? Well, too much of that miasma. That's not particularly helpful to us. So given all that, we are going to have to engage in a bit of speculation here. Mr. Green, I love speculation. It's way more fun than history. Like, what would have happened if the South won the Civil War? No, me from the past. Not that kind of speculation. The kind of speculation where you guess what did happen, not what would have happened. So diseases have been with humans as long as there have been, humans. And humans first appeared in tropical regions in Africa, which are home to a wide variety of microparasites, so it's probably a good bet that those parasites played a role in keeping human populations really low for a long, long time. It's only after we see migration out of Africa and into regions less amenable to diseases, about 64,000 years ago, that we start to see the growth of human populations necessary to create what we problematically call civilizations. So humans migrated into river valleys that became the cradles of civilization, with agriculture and surpluses, etc. This allowed us to escape those population-limiting tropical diseases, but it created all kinds of new disease problems. The communities in river valleys had more people and more population density, which allowed for epidemics. I mean, one of the great things about hunting and gathering is that diseases cannot wipe out a city if you don't have cities. Also, river valleys can be breeding grounds for disease, especially where cultures developed irrigation, which often relied on slow-moving or standing water. And if you've ever had to clean a bird bath, you'll know that standing water is the perfect environment for disease carriers and nasty microorganisms. For example, schistosomiasis was recorded in Egypt as early as 1200 BCE. What is that, Stan? Oh, apparently it's a parasitic flatworm. Do we still have that? Yep, we do. We do. Awesome. Anyway, lots of diseases come from domesticated animals, but you can't have bacon without swine flu. So, it's come see, come shop. That's going to be a hilarious joke when we all die of swine flu. Just kidding. We're all going to die of bird flu. But from a macro-historical perspective, it's not like disease is all downside. I mean, sometimes it's helped populations shield themselves from conquest. That was the case in Africa until the 19th century. Okay, so we like to say that one of the hallmarks of civilization is writing, and pandemic diseases were the type of events that people tended to write about in early civilizations because they were a big deal. Like pestilence appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Early Chinese historians describe the increase in disease as populations spread from the northern Yellow River region to the more tropical Yangtze River region. Ancient Greece was relatively disease-free because of its climate and also the isolated nature of city-states, but the more the cities became involved in trade, the more susceptible to epidemics they were. The best example of this was the plague that struck Athens in 430 and 429 BCE during the Peloponnesian War. And that leads us to a very important point, which is there is a decent correlation between war and disease. Armies tended to carry it along with them, and food shortages and displacements made civilians more likely to get sick. That is still very much the case, and the weird symbiotic relationship between war and disease is something that we're going to look a lot at in the next several weeks. But nothing spreads disease quite like trade. Trade is so good for economies and so bad at keeping individual human beings not dead. Like ancient Rome's integration into transcontinental trade networks like the Silk Road may explain why the historian Livy recorded at least 11 pestilential disasters disasters, and it is very likely that disease and the accompanying decline in population contributed to the fall of the Roman Empire. But of course, you can't talk about the history of disease without mentioning the most famous epidemic of all time, the Black Death. I mean, if the Black Death were a soccer team, it would be Liverpool Football Club. If the Black Death were a band, it would be the Beatles. If the Black Death were an industry, it would be 18th century textile processing in Liverpool.
So I hope this gives you an idea of what I was talking about when I talked about trying to find something that's engaging, appealing, and informative, and also entertaining for the students. You know, by entertainment, I don't mean that we have to pander to students and provide them something that's just going to be entertaining alone, but I do think we have to grab them and hook them on a little bit. I think we can do that with episodes like John Green's video. But we can also find stuff off of iTunes University. We can find stuff off of Coursera that are going to be engaging, that are going to be smart, but they're really going to get the kids into that sort of like higher level thinking about critical thinking. And there are other places to go for that as well. One other possibility, though, is that you could create your own. And actually, I've done this. I've created an entire library for myself of lectures that I do, kind of similar to the one that I'm doing for you now. And I put it up on my own Google channel or my own YouTube channel. So how do you do something like this? Well, you can screencast your lectures. And whether you do them on PowerPoint or you do them on Keynote or you do them on Prezi, you can make one of these lectures that you would make for your class and then just go ahead and screencast them and use them with the students. Now, you know, how are you going to do something like this? Well, one option that I use is Camtasia, and that's what I'm using right now. Camtasia is very easy to learn, comes with a whole bunch of tutorials. The downside is it does have a cost to it. There is a discount for educators, and I've been very fortunate that my school supported me in getting that. I know for a lot of other people out there, it's just not going to be a possibility. But if you can, if your school can't afford that or your department has the money for it, I can't suggest it enough. Once you learn how to do Camtasia, it has so many options available to it, and it allows you to do some of the things that you're seeing me do right now for you guys. However, if affordability is really a problem, and I think it is for a lot of people, QuickTime is very similar to Camtasia. It's free. It comes on almost all types of computers, PCs or Macs. So you could easily use that. Go ahead and make a PowerPoint, a Keynote, or a Prezi, and then go ahead and film yourself, screencast yourself using QuickTime. And then what you want to do is upload that, and you're going to upload it to YouTube and create your own YouTube channel. So like I have my own YouTube channel that has a whole variety of different lectures on there. And it's been great, not only of my students being able to use it, but when I go out and I train teachers, I can refer them to it. And I actually even had one person who was doing some sort of like company who was trying to get information to give out to teachers, who all of a sudden called me up one day and said, hey, you know, I'm really interested in having more teachers look at what you've done here. It's a great way to put yourself out there, publish yourself, and also use this for your students. So the other big question that people have about flipping the classroom is, okay, great. So I have the students learn this stuff at home, then what do I do within the classroom? Which I think is a very fair question, except, you know, the funny thing about that is I think we already kind of know what we want the students to do. I mean, if you think about it, this is always our complaint, right? As teachers, we are always complaining about the fact that we don't have enough time to do all the great stuff that we want to do in the classroom. So it's really not about you doing something completely different from what you've always done. The mindset I think that's better to come with this is that now you have the time to do all those great projects and all those great discussions that you've wanted to do. So, you know, begin your class now with a critical question or controversial theme that usually you would have at the end of class after you presented the material. Have the kids more quickly get into group projects or collaborative assignments. You now have the time to start delving into the students doing a debate, a Socratic seminar, creating a digital narrative, or constructing an essay response. Now, you might still be wondering, yeah, but how do we hold them accountable to doing this? Well, for my students, what I do is that I assign them a set of notes that they have to take off of whatever digital narrative or whatever digital source that I've given. So I give them a set of questions. They have to finish that. They have to type it up, and then they give it to me, and I give them a certain amount of points for doing that every time. So that makes sure that they will have notes in front of them to do these great activities you want them to do. It also is going to turn you, the teacher, into more of a facilitator instead of having to be a disseminator of information. But that brings up another big issue that I think is a false issue, to be quite honest, within education today. You probably have heard this term, and I wanted to bring it up, although I hate cliches, and so it always bugs me, these two cliches of the guide on the side versus the sage on the stage. I'm sure you've heard about this. This is the big cliche that's been used now, and really what this is about is constructivist learning versus direct instruction. And I think that, you know, the way this is usually positioned within education today is that one is better than the other. And typically today, guide on the side is much better than sage on the stage. For me personally, I don't know about you, I really find that to be a false tension. And it really creates a problem, I think, for teachers within the classroom. The truth is, we're neither. We're neither guide on the side, nor are we sage on the stage. We're kind of both. There are times where we have to be sage on the stage because we're dealing with teenagers. There are times when we have to be guide on the side because we want to develop these teenagers' independent thinking skills. So I would suggest that this is just a false tension, and it really ends up creating a lot of guilt for teachers, or a lot of anger for teachers, that they're being positioned in a particular way that they have to be one or the other. I think the better analogy is to think of yourself as a teacher as a continuous coach, and you're switching back and forth. Good coaches know this. Good coaches have to individualize their coaching, and they have to make sure that every single day they're providing a different tactic to deal with the kids that they're dealing with. And we know sometimes the kid who needs us to be the guide on the side, who can challenge themselves, there are a few days during the year where they need us to be a sage on the stage. And sometimes those kids who need us to be the sage on the stage need to get a little bit more independent. And so on that particular day, we're going to be guide on the side. So I think the better way of looking at this is you are a continuous coach, and you're making those determinations on a daily basis, and the flipped classroom allows you to do this. Why is this the case? Well, the reason why is this. The flipped classroom is going to allow you to see the students as needing constant support and cognitive challenges. So that means every single day as you come into the classroom, if you've done a flipped class, you come in, you can check where the students are at, and you can determine, do you need to add some more information on, or can you jump them straight into critical thinking? And as the year goes forward and you use more of these flipped classroom activities, more and more, you're going to be able to step back more and more and allow these kids to kind of take over and take more responsibility for their own learning. So I think in the end, the flipped classroom is a great way in AP World History at the beginning of the year and as the year goes forward to have the kids do the basic work at home, come and you can develop and really harness those skills that they need to have. And it gives you more time. A lot of teachers find this very hard to do, especially at the beginning of the year. I would suggest don't let this overwhelm you. You might want to try and do this once, maybe for every single unit you're doing at the beginning of the year, so maybe every 2 to 3 weeks. And then as you get into the second semester, you might find that you're feeling more comfortable with it, and then you can do it on a more regular basis. I try to do it about once every other week. But that's because I've been doing it for a couple of years. So it does take a little bit of time to get used to. But once you do, I think you're going to take off with it, and you're going to see that it's just another great tool to help you to really develop those skills that you want to develop with your kids when you don't have a lot of time. So if you have any more questions about this, please feel free to talk to me through discussion or through email. And hopefully this is a great way for you to develop the skills-based learning you want to do within your classroom.